This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Welcome to Aquariumania. I'm your host, Dr. Roy Anong, speaking to you from the University of Florida's Tropical Aquaculture Laboratory. Thanks for joining us. What do the Dive Bar in Sacramento, Amazon.com, Aquaplanet Ilsan in Korea, Cabela's, and Bigelow Lab in Maine all have in common? They all have unique and intricately designed aquarium systems designed by Tenji Incorporated, an aquarium design and build company with offices in California and Maine. Mark Faulkner, one of the principals and co-founders of this inspired and talented team of experts, transformed a shared dream into our powerhouse aquarium reality. Join us as Mark and I discuss the complexities of aquarium building and design, Tenji-Style. We'll be right back after these messages.
Tired of wasting money on giant bags, boxes, and jugs of litter that don't last? Switch to World's Best Cat Litter, the only litter that lets you use less and get more. World's Best Cat Litter uses the concentrated power of corn to deliver outstanding odor control and easy cleanup. It's lightweight, 99% dust-free, and pet, people, and planet-friendly. It's even flushable. Make the switch to World's Best Cat Litter and save $2. Visit www.saveonworldsbest.com.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
Welcome back to Aquariumania on Pet Life Radio. My guest today is Mark Faulkner, co-founder of Tenji Incorporated. Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Roy.
So, as we kind of like to do, I'd like to ask a couple of personal questions first before we get into the business and talk more about Tenji and all the amazing aquariums and systems that you have all designed. So let me ask you first, when did you get your very first fish in aquarium, and what was the setup like, if you remember? Also, how old were you?
Well, I got my first real aquarium, I think, in college. I went to North Carolina State University, and I wanted to buy an aquarium because I thought it would be a cool thing to have in my dorm room. It was a super basic setup, just a standard 29-gallon tank with a hang-on-the-back filter. And I immediately was fascinated by it. I had no idea going into it where it would lead me. And I had no idea that I would be so engaged with the animals and trying to provide them, healthy habitat. And I also had no idea how complex aquarium systems were in terms of, water chemistry. And so I kind of started down a rabbit hole with a kind of an impulse purchase. So yeah, I was college age, probably 19 or 20 years old, and it kind of started an obsession and immediately, started keeping larger aquarium vessels and and this was in 93 or 94, and within a year or so I had a 100-gallon reef aquarium doing kind of the old Berlin style method. And
so what was
it kind of went from there.
What was your first fish? Do you remember in the very first aquarium you got?
I think it was probably a poor choice. I think it was an Oscar in a 29-gallon tank, and which quickly outgrew the tank, and I had to find a more sizable home for it rather quickly.
That's great. Now, were there any other influences that kind of got you sort of geared toward the aquarium side of things and even the public aquarium field? You didn't intend to go into that when you were in college, did you?
No, I didn't. I was a business major, and it quickly turned into a hobby of mine. And one of the biggest influences at the time was FAMA, the magazine. I would get it each month and just kind of devour each magazine that came out each month. And books, the Delbecq and Sprung's books are highly influential on me at that point in time. And it's interesting now. I know both of those guys rather well, and you can call them colleagues now. But in the early '90s, they were huge influences on me and my involvement in the hobby. So yeah, I quickly, when I graduated from North Carolina State with a business degree, I turned around, went back to school, and got a marine science degree because my intent was to turn my hobby into my career. So I went back to school for a couple of more years, got a bachelor's of science in marine biology, and that's when I decided that I wanted to turn it into my profession.
So tell us a little bit about, I guess, your professional career, real briefly before you got involved and kind of came up with your partners with Tenji.
So I went to school at UNC Wilmington to get a marine biology degree, and my whole purpose for going to, I guess take a step back, before I decided to get a marine science degree, I was investigating what it takes to work at a public aquarium, and to be an aquarist for a public aquarium, most require a degree in marine science or a related field. So that's when I decided, well, if I want to follow my passion, I need to get the background required to get into get a foot in the door. And so I went back to school, got the marine science degree, and then started applying for internships right before graduation. And I got an internship at Monterey Bay Aquarium. It was a 3-month internship. So I packed up my little Honda Civic and I drove across the country for a temporary 3-month job, and I never left. I'm still in Monterey today.
That's amazing. Yeah, it doesn't happen that often for people, so yeah, it's great.
So a little bit about, if you're interested in my career at Monterey, I was an intern, and then that rolled over into a term position working with the sea otters and the sea otter exhibit. So I was a sea otter trainer for a short stint, and then I got a full-time permanent position as an aquarist, and then senior aquarist. And before I left Monterey, I was a curator there for a couple of years. So kind of got to see several different sides of Monterey Bay Aquarium's husbandry department when I worked there.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know a lot of people that come out of school and they don't get a job immediately, kind of like you did. So that's great.
Lucky.
So let's talk about Tenji now. First of all, I was curious how you came up with the company name Tenji. What exactly does that mean, and how does that apply to the company?
Well, I think the two other gentlemen, Ed Seidel, Andy Case, and I started Tenji, and we wanted to come up with a name that wasn't aqua something or water something different, something that kind of stood out. And we had done my partner at the time, Andy, had done some consulting in Japan, and the word Tenji kind of stuck out to him because the short definition for Tenji is an exhibit or a display. The long definition is taking multiple kind of unrelated items and putting them together into one aesthetically pleasing, display. So we thought it fit what we were trying to do as a company, and it was interesting and unique enough that it stood out. So that's how we landed on the name Tenji for the business.
Okay, so go and explain a little bit about how Tenji began, when, how, and why, and how long you guys have been in business so far.
Yeah, so around 2000, the three of us, Ed, Andy, and myself, decided that we were getting some inquiries outside of the aquarium on, how do you do this? Can you consult with this? And we thought, hey, this seems like an opportunity. And the three of us started the business, and we were doing it nights and weekends and vacation days. And slowly over the course of about 5 or 6 years, the business grew to the point where it could support us full-time. I did Tenji nights, weekends, vacation days for about 7 years. I left Monterey Bay Aquarium in 2007, the beginning of 2007, when we landed a big job that could support us all full-time.
So you basically didn't sleep for 7 years until you left.
I still don't sleep. It's never ending. Yeah, but it's great. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Yeah. For a long time there were 2 jobs, and now it's 1 job, but it's still full-time plus. So yeah, it's fantastic though.
So what do you believe makes Tenji unique? There are obviously some other companies out there. What kind of makes you guys unique, and what are your strengths, both with your employees and the different sections within your company?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that makes us unique is that we offer turnkey product. We can come in and conceptualize new exhibits, new systems, and help on the very initial stages, the front end, conceptual design development. We can see that design through the design development process, detailed design, and then all the way through to the build. And there aren't many companies that have those capabilities. There are design companies and there are build companies, but there aren't too many that do, provide the whole package. And then I think what makes us also unique is that our perspective is different in that we were all keepers at one time. We had our hands in the water. We know what it takes. We know what good access to the top of a tank is like. We know what good access to the filtration system needs to be so that the systems can be maintained. And, the golden rule for designing an aquarium or a life support system is that if you can't maintain it, if you can't get access to it, over time, it's the aesthetics of the display and of the life support system are going to be compromised. And, the end product, a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road is going to not look as pristine as it could as if you had good access to it. So I think we bring that keeper aspect and view to all of our designs because we try to, and there's always this a bit of a struggle too between the exhibit design, the front of house design, and the back of house design because space, especially in public aquariums, is a premium. So typically the front of house designers try to squeeze the back of house space, and the back of house people are trying to push the back of house space to give better access. So we find that we can communicate really well with architects and with exhibit designers to find that kind of sweet spot where the exhibit design teams get what they want, and then we are able to kind of represent the owners and the keepers so that they have easy to maintain and easy to access display tanks. And then as far as our strengths for the different, departments in our business, we have a very, very talented designer on staff. His name's Bob Bassicle. He was the lead exhibit designer for Monterey Bay Aquarium's outer bay wing of their facility with a big open ocean tank and all the permanent jelly displays. And he has decades of design experience. He's a super talented guy. And so we've actually in the last 5 or so years have been doing more of the exhibit design. We've been doing front of house and back of house design. So Bob's super efficient and he's a fantastic drafts person as well as artist, and he can create beautiful renderings that really give the client a taste of what exhibits or displays are going to look like. And then we have Ed and myself. We typically do more of the project management and budgeting and the business aspect of it. Andy, who started the business with us, he's no longer with Tenji, but Ed and myself co-run the company, and we bring with us that unique perspective from the husbandry side of things. And then we have a team of very talented installers that take as much pride in the aesthetics of the piping and making sure that pipes are plumb and level, and we take as much pride in the back of house design and build out as we do the interior of the tank. And then we have, in addition to that, we've got a whole network of vendors and engineers and things that we can bring on board as needed that we've built, this network that we've built over the last 20 years or so of being in the industry. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers what I feel like our strengths are of our business.
Okay, great. Now, I know on your website you talk about LEED, and that's obviously something more important for commercial setups. Can you maybe really briefly explain what LEED is and why that's important?
Yeah, so LEED is a rating system for buildings and a rating system that reflects how green a building is. And our involvement with LEED is somewhat limited. I mean, typically the LEED process is driven by the architect or by the owner, and we work with the architects, with the building engineers to spec the most energy efficient pumps, the most water friendly systems possible. So our involvement is somewhat limited at that. We did have a project, unfortunately it never materialized, but we were working on a LEED project where we were reclaiming water change water. It was going to be a large freshwater planted tank, and all of that water was going to be captured during water changes and then used to water and irrigate the landscape. So coming up with creative things like that is typically our involvement with the LEED process.
Okay. Now, before we talk about some of the specific systems and aquariums, I wanted to point out that, again, you do build commercial and private systems. Mm-hmm. So what's your criteria for taking a request or working with somebody?
None. If they're interested in having a professional, aquarium design and build firm come in and take over a project, then, we're happy to be involved. I mean, typically we we have for residential installations, we have a hard time competing on smaller scale systems with local maintenance firms that do builds. But in the Monterey area, we have built some smaller systems in residences that we actually, continue to maintain. But in terms of a criteria for taking a request, the criteria usually ends up being budget. So, but we do relatively small jobs. We'll build a one-off like a control system and sell it. Or if we've been contacted recently by a film production company that wants, half a dozen relatively small glass starfire tanks so that they can hold animals to film. So, I guess the other criteria are availability and how busy we are. But yeah, so that we don't really have a set, like if you don't meet this criteria, then we can't work with you. We're pretty open, and we love helping people out as much as we can.
Well, that's great. I want to get more into the meat of the projects, and I know you'll do a great job describing some of the amazing systems and aquariums you have. But let's take a short break first, and we'll continue our discussion with Mark Faulkner, principal and co-founder of Tenji Incorporated, after these messages from our sponsors.
We'll be right back, right after these messages. Stay tuned.
Well, she's sitting curled up on my lap as we speak. Beautiful Bella's my long-haired dachshund. She was thrown out of a pickup truck going 30 miles an hour, and she disappeared into the woods with the wild animals, boars and coyotes. About 4 weeks later, she just appeared and she was a mess. Her fur was matted. She scratched almost nonstop. My friend suggested that I order this stuff called Dinovite.
DINOVITE.com. 859-428-1000.
She gobbles it up. She has been itch-free ever since, and her fur is gorgeous. Anyone out there who has a rescue dog, start them on a Dinovite diet for at least a 90-day period. They bond better with the people who take good care of them. They are going to be your buddy for a very, very long time.
859-428-1000.
859-428-1000.
DINOVITE.com.
Let's talk pets.
Let's talk pets
On Pet Life Radio.
Pet Life Radio.
PetLifeRadio.com.
We're back and continuing our conversation with my guest, Mark Faulkner of Tenji Incorporated, Aquarium Build and Design. So thanks for that great introduction, Mark. I want to talk a little bit more specific now. Can you tell us, do you remember what was Tenji's very first build?
The first build we did was for a client and still a client and a good friend of ours, Steve Dennis, in Carmel Highlands, and we built it's about 300-gallon freshwater planted aquarium for him. That's still running today. We help him when he goes on vacation. We'll do the maintenance for him, but it's still beautiful, and that was 2001, so that was over 16 years ago, and the tank's still chugging along.
And any specific types of plants or fish that were
well, it was an Amazon-ish display. A school of cardinal tetras and discus, and at that time, that tank has morphed over the years, but at the onset we did South American plants, swords, and some low foreground plants, and so relatively easy to maintain. We CO2 controlled through pH controller, and at the time I think we installed power compacts on it, but now he's on all LED lights. We upgraded his light fixtures a couple of years ago.
So after you talked about that a little bit, can you walk us through the process from start to finish? You can either talk about a residential or a commercial project, whichever is easier.
Over the years, there is no typical. Every project is unique, and projects come to us in a variety of fashions. Oftentimes we're bidding on drawing sets that were produced by an engineering firm for us to build. So that's one way for us to get involved on some of the commercial projects that we do, some of the larger installations that we do. We're actually not, oftentimes in those projects, we're not involved in the design, but we get hired to to do the build out of them. Sometimes, which is a scenario that we do like, we're often contacted for, say, a large residential installation, either the owners doing their homework or the architects doing their homework, and they oftentimes call public aquariums and say, who would you hire, who would you use to design and build a large, residential installation, and we get lots of references from the public aquariums that we've worked for. So we would team up with the architect, and oftentimes we're hired by the owners, but we're working with the architects and the engineers that are designing the house, and we get brought in really early in the process when the house is just on paper, right? And we're able, that's the scenario that we like best, when we're able to have a say in where and how big the area for mechanical, the equipment is. And oftentimes that's on maybe a floor below in a mechanical room. And we can do everything from telling them where to put floor drains and telling them how to treat the walls in the space so that, it's a wet location environment, can add, sinks and fixtures, and we can tell them exactly how much and what type and where we want power located. So we're involved pretty heavily in the front end of the design. And then that process is long. So, there have been residential installations where we were contacted early on in the process and the build wasn't complete for 3 or 4 years. So these things can drag on, as you might imagine. But in terms of the larger residential installations, that's how we are typically involved. And we're also involved in the structural side of things. So we'll provide like floor loading requirements for the tank vessels and how the tank vessels are attached to the house in case of any type of seismic or earthquake event. And so we work closely with the designers and the engineers throughout the process.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot you guys have the whole earthquake issue there.
Yeah. Everything needs to be reinforced and captured so things don't dance around when the earth starts to move.
Yeah. So now I wanted to actually ask you about, I was in Sacramento visiting a friend of mine at UC Davis, another fish veterinarian, and we did actually, we walked into, passed by, and so I had to walk into the dive bar. So can you tell us a little bit about the dive bar?
Yeah, that was a while ago. I wasn't the lead on that project, but I was involved. In terms of structural, that was a huge undertaking. That tank it's about 7,000 gallons. I can't remember the length. It's probably 40 feet long, 7 feet deep, and roughly 7 feet front to back. The window is kind of cantilevered out, and it's perched up above where the bartenders stand. So the bartenders, when they're working, they're actually working below the tank. The tank cantilevers out from the wall, and the patrons, when they're on the other side of the bar, they can look up into this angled window that's angled down towards them. The steel structure that went into supporting that and cantilevering, supporting that cantilevered load, it was amazing. An engineering firm designed that, and it's all steel construction that ties into the main building structure. The steel goes all the way down to the basement and then crosses the opposite side of the room to support that cantilevered load. And so all the life supports in the basement. And the interesting thing that, about that tank is that a mermaid swims in it in the evenings when the bar is open. So until she or he, I think mermen actually get in there as well, will do laps back and forth across the tank. We built it, and then we handed it off to a local maintenance company. So I actually haven't seen that tank in probably 5 years. So hopefully when you saw it, it still looked like it was being maintained okay.
Yeah, I think it was. And you guys got real authentic mermaids and mermen, right? I mean, they're
real life.
Yeah.
We went to collect. We had a major collection trip to go collect those guys. That's what
I figured. So, hey, I want to talk about the Amazon.com tank. Uh-huh. How did you end up getting that job? And I mean, it was amazing, really beautiful. And I if you don't mind describing it a little bit as well to the listeners, but can you talk us through how that all happened and everything that's in it?
Yeah, actually, that's been one of my favorite builds. It's not a huge. I mean, it's a large tank. It's 18 feet long, 2 feet front to back, 2 feet tall. So it's volume-wise, it's 700 or 800 gallons. So it's not huge in terms of the projects that we do, but it's probably one of my favorite installations. We were contacted by Amazon.com, their director of horticulture, that oversees all of their scapes, all of their outside landscaping, and they have a massive kind of 2-acre greenhouse outside of Seattle where they're, constantly growing plants. Anyway, we were contacted by him. He was a planted aquarium enthusiast, a hobbyist, and he had a vision for this space. And so we worked with him and the interior designers for the space. We were given some direction on tank length and shape, and then we took it from there and designed that. Our responsibility was to design the tank vessel, the support stand, and then all of the life support. And we were working with Tom Barr. I don't know if you're familiar with Tom Barr, but he's one of the kind of leading aquatic plant minds in the country. And then Steve Waldron, who is the local guy up in Seattle, who has a dedicated freshwater planted aquarium store in Seattle that's fantastic. So those guys were responsible for the interior of the tank, all of the scaping and the planting, and then Steve has since, he's responsible for all the ongoing maintenance. But in terms of our work, the life support system, we have a really large, oversized sump. It's an MRC, one of their ice sumps, the white PVC sumps that are beautiful. Those guys do such good work. We are using kind of high-end stuff, Biz pumps, one of their A400s to kind of drive the system. So the water overflows in the tank down to the sump through a series of bag filters. Water is being pushed back to the tank with the Biz. There's a bio tower, degas tower inside the tank. Actually, it's not doing a lot of degas because we sealed it pretty well to prevent CO2 off-gassing. And then we repurposed an O2, an oxygen reactor for CO2. So we're introducing CO2 into this fiberglass chamber where it goes under pressure and goes into solution. And then that water gets sent directly back up to the tank. All of this is controlled. We've been using the Neptune Systems Apex control systems for a while now and kind of adapting them to a more industrial and commercial environment by putting them into NEMA, waterproof enclosures, and using kind of industrial quality float switches or ultrasonic level sensors. And so this system is highly controlled in terms of automation. We have the system set up to do daily kind of fractional water changes, roughly 10% volume per day. So in the morning before the lights come on, there's an actuated valve that opens and it drains a specific amount of volume out of that oversized sump. The actuated valve closes and then another actuated valve opens to fill the sump back up to an operating level. So that happens daily. We also have that second actuated valve set up to maintain operating level in the sump for top off or evaporative loss. We have all of the nutrient dosing that the plants require. That's all done through dosing pumps. We set it up so that Steve could mix up batch solutions of the macronutrients, N, P, and K, and then another batch of trace elements, and that the quantity of those can be programmed and set up so that, the plants are getting exactly what they need. They're never nutrient limited, and that gives them the best opportunity to outcompete algae. And the method that we based it all off was Tom Barr's estimative index, which is we've been employing on all of our planted aquariums for a number of years now. We found it to be the easiest and most reliable and the best method for, having exceptional plant growth and practically no algal growth. So all the controls were set up to facilitate his estimative index method. So we set up the system, we got it operating, up and running, did all the commissioning, making sure that the system operated as designed, and then we handed it over to Tom Barr and to Steve Waldron to do all the aquascape. I can't take any credit for the planting and for the way the tank is scaped. That was all those guys. We were more of the nuts and bolts to make sure the system worked as they required.
Now, do they, I'm just curious, since it's Amazon, do they go with just Amazonian plants, or do they just do kind of a mix?
No, there's a mix. But they do have. I mean, the fish species is just a huge school of cardinal tetras, which is pretty amazing to see in person. Cool. That and hundreds of Amano shrimp. Those are pretty much all there are in the tank as far as fish and invertebrate life.
Nice. Okay. So let me ask you real briefly too. Then you guys, I noticed on your website you've done a lot of work for Cabela's. How did you get involved with Cabela? And can you maybe talk about one or two of the systems that you really like?
Yeah. So Cabela's was one of those projects where we oftentimes get opportunities to bid on pre-designed life support systems, and that's what Cabela's were. So they would send us the RFP, request for proposal, and which included, the engineered drawings for the system, and we would bid on them. And we probably, I don't know, over the years we've bid on 20 systems, and we've probably won about 13 of those bids. So we had a pretty good success in terms of being awarded the Cabela's projects, and the systems were pretty much all more or less. Each system would evolve slightly, but they were more or less the same. The tank shapes were more or less the same, and the life support system design was more or less the same for each of the systems. So in terms of a favorite, they were all more or less the same. Some installs were easier than others. Sometimes we were doing installs in Wisconsin in the middle of the winter, and we had hundreds of feet of 3 and 4 and 6 inch PVC pipe delivered, and it was sitting outside in the frozen mud. And, so that was probably one of my least favorite, just because of the circumstances involved in the construction process. But we got pretty good at them in terms of cranking them out pretty quickly. The last, I think, couple that we did, we would show up to an empty life support room. The tank would be in place, and we could plumb a rather complicated life support system with big pipe. We would start Monday morning, and by Thursday afternoon, we'd have water running through it. So we would bring in a team of our in-house installers, along with a mechanical contractor that we used from Michigan. We would get 2 of their guys to come in and help us, and we would crank through the life support system. And we were also responsible for the rock work for the last, I would say, 10 installations that we did. We built out the mountain and the waterfalls, and then the Cabela's would set all of the taxidermy animals on top, and then our rockwork guys would come back in and kind of make it look seamless around the attachment points for those taxidermied animals. As you know, I don't know if you know or not, but Cabela's is now a part of, if they haven't been already, have been bought out by Bass Pro Shops. And so those jobs kind of came to an end for us. They haven't built any new stores recently. So we haven't built any Cabela stores in the last 8-10 months or so.
Okay, that's right. I think I vaguely remember that. So, hey, I wanted to ask you about the Aquaplanet exhibit. Can you maybe describe that a little bit and talk about that briefly?
Yeah, so those are some interesting shaped jellyfish tanks, arched jellyfish tanks that were installed in an aquarium in South Korea. Our involvement in that process, we were hired by Reynolds, the acrylic manufacturer, to help design the tank in terms of flow dynamics to make sure the tanks would be appropriate for jellies. We have a lot of jellyfish experience from our hands-on experience at Monterey. I was a jelly keeper for a while, and Ed also has quite a bit of jelly experience. So we are often hired to design jelly tanks, and so Reynolds reached out to us when they had this unique tank shape that had never been built before, and we were able to produce some computer models of flow to make sure that the proper velocity was getting to all of the corners of the tank to keep the jelly suspended but not to cause any damage. And so they hired us to do that. We designed the tank vessels, and then Reynolds finished the build, and we did not do the installation on that one. We were more involved on the front end of that project.
And these are they're kind of like these enormous arches, right?
Yeah, arches. You actually walk under them, and you can look up and see the jellies floating over your head. And there's a pair of them. Yeah,
which is pretty interesting. I mean, keeping the jellies off of the sides, in a non-circular kind of system must have been pretty interesting for you guys.
Yeah, it was a design challenge for sure, and that was one of Ed Seidel's projects. He was the lead on that one.
So you've built many different types of tanks and systems. Do you prefer freshwater planted or marine reef tanks?
Oh, yeah, I can't say. I love them both. I was really, really into freshwater planted aquariums for a long time as a hobbyist, and so that definitely holds a special place. They're so different, though; it's hard to compare. I had kind of stepped away from keeping my own tanks for quite a while after I left Monterey. But we recently, well, I would say about 4 years ago, we started designing a new showroom space, and I wanted a nice reef tank in the showroom, and so we set it up, and it was and still is my baby, and so I actually have been really enthralled and reinvigorated with the hobby, just maintaining and setting up and maintaining this reef tank that we have in our showroom. So, they both provide a different aesthetic experience. I mean, there's nothing that compares to sitting in front of a beautifully aquascape freshwater planted aquarium. It's serene. It's hard to compare anything to that. But the technique there's more or less a recipe. Obviously there's the artistic side of creating a natural looking scape, but once you have that, the maintenance of it there's a recipe, whereas, reef keeping is a little more challenging in providing that absolutely stable environment that your SPS corals need if they're going to be colorful and thrive. So I really like both of them. I have quite a bit of experience with both of them, but I can't choose one over the other because they're so different.
Two kids, you can't say you like one better than the other. I get it. I get it.
Exactly.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Did you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Well, I'm sure your listeners are all experienced aquarium people, and I think I'm constantly and continually, after being in the hobby and the profession for decades now, I'm still kind of in love with what I do. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's a teaching and learning tool that's kind of unrivaled. Where else can you get biology and physics and art, animal care, and it's a rabbit hole that you can go down as deep as you want, and there's really no other thing that I've found that is so intriguing. So final words is, keep it up, and if you get frustrated with the hobby, just don't give up. And then the other thing, I guess final words is, I really think people need to be paying attention to what's happening in the wild with coral reef and reef coral bleaching and global warming. And I think the hobby is going to change considerably as we continue to lose more and more of our wild reefs. And, hopefully the aquarium hobby is a source of inspiration for people to want to kind of protect the wild reefs, as well as, freshwater systems as well. So anyway, those are my final words.
Well, thanks very much. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank our producer, Mark Winter, for making the show possible. Please be sure to check out Mark Faulkner's webpage, which will be on our Aquariumania site for his episode. I encourage all of you to visit my Aquariumania blog on Pet Life Radio. And if you have any questions, comments, or ideas for a show, email me at drroy@petliferadio.com. That's DrRoy@petliferadio.com. Until next time, please visit your local aquarium stores and keep your tanks clean and your fish healthy. And definitely keep an eye out for the latest and greatest builds from Tenji Incorporated.
Let's Talk Pets, every week on demand, only on PetLifeRadio.com.